All right, welcome into Destination the Show, episode 34. My name is Jamie Cameron here, as always, with my guy Jeremy Nygaard. Jeremy, what's up, man? How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Wolves in four and moving on. So I'm not
Wolves in
ready to
four.
close the book yet on basketball season, even though the Twins have won 10 straight.
That's
Um,
right.
but no, I'm good. I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. You survived Vegas, which I think is something we should talk about another time when we don't have a guest on. Uh, you made it. Are you in one piece?
I, I'm back to One Piece. But yeah, we'll talk about it at some point and it'll be great. But yeah, it was a trip.
Okay. Well, as you mentioned, Twins have won 10 in a row. Brewers and Cubs are trucking along, and the calendar has turned, and we are in May, which means that, at least for us, draft season is up and running in earnest. And I am excited because we have a guest today, Jeremy. Absolutely delighted to welcome into the show Joe Doyle. He is the senior draft analyst at FSS, that's Future Star Series, also host of the Overslot podcast. Joe, how are you? Welcome. Thanks for joining us, man.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. I'm excited to be on, and Jamie, Jeremy, I've talked to both of you guys before. It's a pleasure to be back.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So, Joe, let's start here before we jump right in and talk shop. Um, for anyone not familiar with you or your work, tell us a little bit about your path into the baseball industry, how you got into kind of draft evaluation, right? Because I feel like on this podcast we talk about prospects in the draft most of all, and prospects is already kind of niche, but the draft is a whole different animal. So how did you get into it, and how did you kind of get to where you are today?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've had that question before, and I think the roundabout way of where it all started was I was always the guy growing up that would buy MLB The Show, Madden, but I wouldn't like play the game. I would just do the drafting, and I would just do the prospect development and just like see if I could, like nurture a superstar. And so I think that's kind of the crux of it all. But in terms of like how I actually got here, so I started actually writing about baseball for my own blog in 2014.
Mm-hmm.
I then joined Lookout Landing, the SB Nation site for the Mariners, in 2017, I believe, writing exclusively about prospects. I had some bylines at Baseball America and Fox Sports under the Rivals.com moniker, if you will. And then I think it really started taking off in late 2018 when I joined Prospects Live, and Jeff Ponce and I and some others really started just digging in hard on prospects, and we built a nice following over there with the draft. And before you know it, about a year and a half ago now, I joined Future Star Series, and I've been writing and evaluating for those guys for since 2023.
Right on.
So as we look at this upcoming draft, right? I think we've heard that it's not super strong. It's not as deep as last year. Is it maybe fair to say that the top of this class is looking a little stronger now than it was, or how would you compare or stack up the dudes from last year, right? Because there were some dudes with the top of this, but the potential dudes in this class.
Yeah, I think something that is very important to remember in any MLB draft, if you look at the landscape of Major League Baseball, the superstars, the stars, the guys that are getting MVP votes, they almost always come from the high school ranks. They almost always come from the high school ranks. I mean, if you look at
Mm-hmm.
the vast majority of stars in Major League Baseball, they were high school draft picks or they were international signings. And so while I do think the 2024 draft has some decorated college hitters, it really does, and some maybe undervalued college pitchers in Hagen Smith and Chase Burns. History has kind of told us that 10 years from now, the college bat generally doesn't blossom into something spectacular. So I think there's a handful of very good players here. I think the general lack of impact and up the middle talent at the high school level is going to what eventually characterizes this draft as slightly below average. But to your point, the top 8 to 10 guys in this class could stack up with, well, I shouldn't say the top 8 to 10, but there's a few guys at the top of this class that can metrically stand up next to Wyatt Langford and Dylan Cruz for sure.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask you about that, Joe, because I feel like I think it's fair to say that like the college baseball offensive landscape is become bloated in the past couple of years, right? And this season is a great example of that, where we see this incredible home run race and records being broken, and what Charlie Condon and Jack Caglione are doing is incredible. Given how kind of inflated the college offensive environment seems to be, does that color how you analyze guys at all in preparation for the draft? And is it fair to say that maybe we want to rely on traits, right? As opposed to just what their college production looks like, given how far the ball seems to be traveling this season and the last couple.
Yeah, no, I think so. At least for me, and everyone does it a little bit differently. There are people in the industry that start with exit velocity, which is totally fine. Everyone has their own process. I've always started with chase rate and contact rate because I want to find a hitter. Like, give me a hitter first and foremost, and we'll talk about the traits and the measurables and the projection second. This class has quite a few hitters. The ball is flying out of stadiums like it never has before, and OPS is higher than it's ever been in college baseball by a mile. But I don't think you can discredit what some of these 6'6" sluggers are doing in terms of pure bat to ball skills. You can't really take that away from them with hot bats or hot balls, whatever. So, Charlie Condon is making as much contact as anybody in the country. Travis Bazzana, the same. And one thing I would also kind of hedge on that is, while the ball is flying out like crazy, there's also like 4 or 5 guys at the top of this class that are like 6'6". You know what I mean? So like these are behemoth sized athletes that happen to be able to put up good contact rates. And I just don't think we've really seen that. Like, it's the duality between Charlie Condon, Jack Caglione, Nick Kurtz, and 7 inches shorter Travis Bazzana and JJ Weatherholt is just, it's nutty. There's no, it's weird to think Braden Montgomery at 6'3", 225 pounds is somehow in the middle in terms of the size quotient. So
yeah,
I don't know.
For sure. So let me ask you this then, but before we jump into kind of demographics and such, because we are a AL and NL Central adjacent podcast, right? We talk about the Brewers, the Cubs, and the Twins. And so obviously it's noteworthy for Twins fans that the Guardians lucked into some draft lottery fortune and they're picking number 1 overall. If it was you making the call today, is it as locked in as take Charlie Condon, best player on the board, or is there a case to be made for, well, maybe there's a guy who's had a really incredible season from this crop of college hitters, and we can spread our already considerable bonus pool resources out and really kind of manage the top talent on this draft board?
Yeah. So the first part of that question, I think the important part that Guardians fans need to know, and just the draft landscape as a whole needs to know, because there are 5 or 6 guys that can be leveraged against one another, nobody's getting $10.5 million in this draft. Not a chance. There's not a chance. I mean, Charlie Condon is too close to what Jack Caglione and Braden Montgomery and Travis Bazzana are to demand full slot. I don't think there's any chance that anybody gets full slot. I think the conversation really starts at about $10 million. And then for me, and I know I stand in a minority here, I would take Bazzana 1-1, despite him being 7 inches shorter and not having the raw power that the other guys do. I've known Travis at least kind of personally and from a baseball standpoint for 2.5 or 3 years now, the intangibles about the way that guy's mind works, I think cannot be understated. He is brilliant. He's pragmatic. Um, and I think he just understands the game better than these guys do. And not to mention, all of his hit tool markers are stronger than the other guys for the most part. So I would take Bazana. I think he's the best blend of floor, ceiling, and potential stardom in this class.
Mhm.
And yeah, I think he adds a little bit of value on the bases that other guys don't.
So usually I'm the one that jumps in with random questions. That time it was Jamie, which is great. But I guess the thing that all of this kind of leads back to me is how these guys fit defensively. And so last year there was a lot of value with guys at the top where they could play defensively. And if it was the infield, it's probably shortstop. If it's in the outfield, it's maybe center. And they all had the bats, right? This year it seems like there's very few prep shortstops, even less. I mean, not less, but not a great position player crop. You're buying bats with all these guys. Is there any demographic that stands out as strong aside from like college hitters when you look at this whole thing? Because once you get past these top 7-8 hitters, like, what are we doing?
Yeah, no, that's a good way of looking at it. I think comparably speaking, and I know this falls under the college hitter category, but I do think they live on an island of their own. I do think college catching is pretty strong this year. College catching generally does actually translate pretty well to the big league level, and you can't get enough college catching, or you can't get enough catching in your organization. But to answer your question, like, not really. I mean, this draft really is built around college hitting and specifically top heavy. College pitching falls off a cliff pretty quickly. High school pitching is, I don't want to say non-existent, but you got to squint, right? I think over the last couple of months, there have been some high school shortstops that have begun to, I guess, float their way to the top. I still can't figure out whether or not they're being pushed up the boards because teams are just seeking that sort of demographic in the first round of every draft, or whether or not they're talented enough to warrant this sort of consideration. Like, as a couple of examples, the one that I really do like is Wyatt Sanford. He's the left-handed hitter out of Frisco, Texas. I think he's in a normal year, I think he would fit in the 20 to 30 range. I've got him at 21 right now. But guys like that, guys like Kellen Lindsay, the kid from Florida, who's the fastest kid in the draft by far, but he's hardly played baseball, and he's being talked about, or at least hardly played baseball at the highest level on the showcase and travel ball circuit. He's getting shoved up into the first round. Guys like Carter Johnson and Tyson Lewis, like, I think teams want to make the high school class, the high school shortstop class, more noteworthy than it probably is. Maybe, I guess overdrafting some guys. But that is a roundabout way of saying I don't think high school shortstops are necessarily any sort of strength.
Mm-hmm.
So let me just, I got to do it.
Sure.
If this is the case, is this going to be a draft where we see those top 8 or 9 guys go? You sprinkle in those college pitchers, and then things get weird to the point where you maybe overpay for a high school guy, but it's under slot. So you can push more money down and then just take more bites at this apple. Because you just said it. The stars come from high school. And sometimes they're 3rd round picks. Sometimes they're 6th round picks because there's so much projection that you'd be better off going that route, because once you get past that, what really is there? Is that something that teams could do? Or at some point, is it where maybe a lot of teams do that it pushes actual value down further in the draft?
I think this draft, I was talking to a scouting director about that last night. I think this draft could devolve into chaos after about the 15th pick. But the only thing stopping it from happening is the fact that there isn't a ton of talent outside, like, to buy. Like, there's not a ton of talent to save money for in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th round. Like, those guys exist. but they're not guys that you build your draft around per se, which makes me think, there are going to be guys. I firmly believe there are going to be guys not ranked in the top 50 on most boards that are taken in the 20 to 30 range. I think there are going to be overdrafted guys, and maybe they take a haircut, and maybe it affords a team the ability to go after a high school shortstop they specifically really like, or a high school pitcher they specifically really like in the second round. But I just get the feeling the red flags on the college bats after the top 10 are very, very loud. They're not just like here's an example, and I don't mean to like go on a tangent here.
No, please do. We love it.
Yeah. So, and this is nothing against this guy specifically. I like this player a lot, but he's being elevated pretty quickly right now. A guy like Billy Amick, third baseman at Tennessee, right?
JB loves
Billy
him.
Amick. Yeah. So Billy Amick has shown better at third base than I think anybody expected. And the raw power is unquestionable with that kid. His contact rate this year is like, last I looked, it was like 71%, 72%. And if you guys remember Yohandy Morales last year, Yo-Yo Morales, the big thing with Yo-Yo was, I don't know if he can hit. The chase rates are high. I don't know if he can hit. Yo-Yo was like a 78% contact rate. So it's like, it's guys like that where it's like, okay, Billy Amick has tools at third base. He has raw power. He's being talked about in the second half of the first round, but the red flags on his metrics are so big that it's like he could go 16. He was mocked to the Mariners today, 15, 16. It wouldn't surprise me if Billy Amick went 50. So I think the conversations and the dialogue that are going to take place in war rooms and in the days leading up to the draft are going to be fascinating. And I just think there's going to be teams that are like, you know what, let's just take for example, 15 or 16, 14, 15, 16. Let's just take, Cash Mayfield or Joey Okie or one of these high school arms that could blossom into a frontline guy rather than the Billy Amick where, we might spend 2 years trying to figure out if he can hit more than, 220 at the big league level. Again, I want to stress nothing against Billy Amick. I'm just speaking to the numbers that he's posted this year. Yeah,
that makes sense. And we're definitely gonna come back and poke around in the prep right-handed demo is I think a very interesting one, and I'm gonna call it widely 30 to 80 range. There's a lot of guys. I do want to follow up, Joe, on something you mentioned about catching, and actually had made a note to ask you about that, and you kind of answered it already in saying that college catching is better this year. I mean, last year it was beyond thin, right? There was, the catching class overall, I think Blake Mitchell, Kyle Teal, and Michael Carrico were maybe the top 100 guys, two right at the top, and then Carrico was somewhere in the 80 to 100 range. So let me pivot my question to this. There's this interesting group of college catchers: Caleb Lomavita, Malcolm Moore, Jacob Cozart, probably Walker Yannick you can throw in there now. And everywhere I've seen has preferred a different guy, which I always find fascinating and interesting. If you had to kind of pinpoint a college catcher number one for you, who is it and why?
So for me, it's Malcolm Moore, and I think I lean pretty heavy. I'm not shy about the fact that I lean on data. I do. I go to these games. I watch a ton of these kids live. I want to see how they operate in the dugout and how athletic they are and how it all works. But I also lean on the data. And with Malcolm Moore, it's elite bat to ball skills. It's an elite approach. He doesn't chase ever. And while the results this year have been kind of a roller coaster, he's had so much poor BABIP luck that I kind of give him a pass. Plus, I think anybody that can get into Stanford has the grades to get into Stanford and then produce as a true sophomore, as a full-time starting catcher from the time he stepped on campus as a teenager. I give a little bit of credence there, but I think Yannick would be comfortably number 2 for me. But for me, I don't think any of the guys that you just listed are going to be decorated defensive catchers at the next level. So, you're buying the bat almost exclusively with a lot of these guys. Yannick probably the best chance to be an above average defender.
Right on. Okay, good deal. All right, we're gonna kind of start putting you on the spot a little more here, Joe, if that's okay.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
we're gonna pick your brain about some options, right, for the teams that we talk about most on this podcast. Not necessarily, obviously, it's May, so we're still a ways away. Not necessarily based on like intel or information, but just thinking and looking at your board and trying to highlight a couple of names that more casual draft fans can kind of latch onto. It's like, ooh, this is kind of what the caliber of talent might be around where my team is picking right now. So we're going to start with the Cubs, who pick first in the first round at 14. And, we talk about this quite a bit on this show. They're in an interesting spot and somewhat similar to last year in that they just missed the playoffs last year. They don't have a ton of picks or a ton of money. Last year, obviously, the Matt Shaw pick is looking phenomenal. But do you think the fact that they have basically 3 picks on the top 100 and a fairly limited pool just because they're a revenue paying team changes their calculus at pick 14 to be any less risk averse? And who are guys, 1 or 2 guys you would highlight on your board that you think might be options for them?
Yeah, I mean, I got to tell you, like, teams picking after pick 12, I would say, are in a tough spot, right? I mean, there's clearly a tier down after, we'll say, JJ Weatherholt or whoever you want to put as that like 11th guy comes off the board, 10th or 11th guy comes off the board. I think if you're the Cubs, you're kind of just hoping that Weatherholt or Hagen Smith or I think a guy like Trey Savage, hoping that he gets to 14 would be great. I don't think he's going to. I think he's going to go in the top 10. But some guys that I would circle, like, here's the thing. The guy that I've seen him mocked there before. Seaver King has some similarities to what Javi Baez was in Chicago. I mean, it's a ton of chase. He is a very aggressive free swinger, but it's also gaudy batted ball data. It's batted ball data that goes back to using a wooden bat on the Cape. Like, the guy clearly has impact, and he's got tools that'll play in center field, that'll play at shortstop. You can find a place for Seaver King. It doesn't matter if you're saying, oh, we've got a shortstop, oh, we've got a center fielder. It doesn't matter with Seaver King. Like, you can find a spot on the diamond for him. I think he would be a really interesting player. There is risk with a player that's only been playing in the ACC for a year and has not shown like the polish that you want to see, but I think he makes sense. But this is something that I talked about on my mock draft. The Cubs don't have a future like dude behind the plate. They just, Ballesteros is not a guy that I'm like buying a ton of stock in right now, right? Malcolm Moore makes some sense. And 3 weeks ago, I would have said no chance Walker Yannick is the guy, but Walker Yannick might make some sense. Now, whether or not they're close enough to the best player available on the board at 14 remains to be seen, but I still think it's a pretty decent year for the Cubs to find their catcher of 2027 and beyond in this class. And, maybe it's in the first round or maybe it's in rounds 2 or 3. There's going to be some good options there.
For sure.
Yeah. So the next team that we're going to ask you about is a team whose draft we both loved last year, the Brewers. And in watching the Brewers draft and also watching the Cubs draft, one was very exciting. One was relatively boring. The way that they pulled off, the Cooper Pratt, Batanti, like then all the guys later and on day 3 when it was like, where's this money going to come from? And then they found that money. To They went over slot on dudes. They found tons of upside. Two questions: could they do that again? Would they do that again? Would it be worth it to do that again? And then looking at pick number 17, what are some potential options that they would have at 17?
The Brewers are interesting, guys. I don't know, when they flipped that deal with the Mariners, was it the Mariners? No, who did they flip that deal? The Corbin Burns deal. When they flipped the Corbin Burns deal to get that, they got a ton of money in that. I think the Brewers have the 17th pick, but like the 8th most amount of money or something like that in this draft. It's an interesting spot because I think at 17, and I can tell you they've done their due diligence here. I don't know whether or not it's going to mean anything, but say Connor Griffin is there at 12. Say Bryce Rayner is there at 12. It's not a great draft as things start to unfold. If you're Milwaukee, can you offer the money to pull him down to 17? I mean, there's very, very few teams that can pull something like that off this season. But the Brewers are one of them. They could just punt that comp A pick in an effort to pull down a Connor Griffin or a Bryce Rayner. I don't think, I'm sure one of those guys is going to be off the board in like the top 6 picks. But if one of them does happen to fall to 11 or 12 and you got to cough up, $2 million extra bucks to pull him down to 17, I think that would be a pretty fun wrinkle for the draft. And I think it's very, very, very possible. Think of it like this. Like if you are the Brewers and you make that Corbin Burns deal, do you make that Corbin Burns deal thinking, okay, we're getting one of the best high schoolers in the draft because we're making this deal in a draft where you probably don't have a ton of value at 17? So they're like the one wild card that I'm watching in July that I think could kind of throw a big wrinkle into the draft. But like beyond that, like what they're going to do, they've been so bat heavy over the years, so bat heavy. It's just always bats with the Brewers. I loved the Misiorowski pick. I'm glad that they went out on a limb and tried to grab something so unique. I would expect more bats. There are some guys in this class that have interesting release traits, like a Levi Sterling. Maybe you pull him away from the University of Texas in the second round. He's kind of interesting. But maybe Joey Oki is another one if they can pull him down. But yeah, the Brewers have drafted well over and over and over. And because of that, it's why I'm thinking like Connor Griffin at 17. Like, could it happen? I think maybe.
I love that. I'm all for the chaos theory. Yeah, the Brewers are not predictable, so I'm with that 100%. Okay, let me ask you about one more team, and I realize as we're going down the board that these like hypotheticals are more and more ridiculous, but it's also fun, right? So I'm gonna also ask you about the Twins at 21. They are also a team who was drafted incredibly successfully in recent years. They have a comp pick for Sonny Gray, rejecting the qualifying offer. I think that's about $2.75 million of additional funds for them at 33. They've done a little bit of everything in recent years, and Twins fans love to erroneously talk about how the Twins only draft college bats, but they recently drafted Chase Petty. That seems to be a pick that's worked out well, even though he's no longer with the organization. College bat and Brooks Lee, prep bat and Walker Jenkins. Obviously, there were massive benefactors in the first draft lottery. Any interesting names that you think might be available at 21? I feel like we're now in the significant drop-off in talent potentially in the first round, but curious for your thoughts there.
Yeah, I think so. The Twins are a team that they always seem to have a plan, right? Like they always seem to kind of follow a structure in their draft. They always seem to go for a certain type of a player. And I think quietly, the Twins don't get enough credit for their pitching development. I mean, they really have put together a sturdy bullpen, both organically and in player acquisition over the years. And they always seem to get like the 90th percentile outcome out of the arms that they put in that rotation. I mean, you just very rarely see a Twins pitcher fall flat on his face. So because of that, the guy that I'm looking at for the Twins, and I don't have any intel on this, but I think it'd be a good fit would be Brody Brecht if he could land at 17. I don't know if he can get that low, or at 21, excuse me. I don't know if he's gonna be there. Like he's actually pitched really, really well over the last few weeks. I think he's got like 2 earned runs in his last 19 innings or something crazy like that with like 29 strikeouts. He had fallen back into that 20 to 30 range, and I think he's starting to get a little bit of buzz again. But anyways, my point is, if he's there at 21, I think he'd be a perfect project for Minnesota, and I really do think that would be a good landing spot for a team that has shown that they can develop some pitching talent. So that would be a team that I think it would be a good fit for Brody Brecht. I don't know if he's there. I don't even know if they would want him because they haven't really gone for college pitchers before, but he's one of those guys with like top 5 pick stuff that it's never really come together that I think would be a pretty good value at 21.
Love it.
Yeah, that's a fun name to consider at that point.
Yeah.
All right. So
let me give you one more, Jeremy, before I move. And I this is another guy that I don't know if he'd be there. We've seen the Twins over the years go for the power hitting corner infielder. It's you look back at Cavaco, you look back at who's the other one that I'm thinking of?
Aaron Sabato.
Sabato is a lesser example. They took a third baseman as well that I'm trying to remember, but it's not coming to me. Cam Smith at Florida State, I think, is an interesting name for them. I think he checks a lot of the metric boxes that they've kind of targeted in the past. I mean, you look at the way that they've built that offense over the years with Larnick and Wallner and some of these just slugging corner types that have a ton of raw power. Cam Smith would check that box as well, and they've played big bodied people at third base before, right? So it wouldn't surprise me if Cam Smith was on their radar.
Love that one. Sign me up. Okay, go ahead, Jeremy.
So we've talked now team-specific stuff, but let's look at a demographic that Jamie kind of alluded to, prep arms. And I think for me, that's the most exciting demographic when you get into this range, right? And it seems like there's a whole bunch of them between like 35 and 80. So the end of day one, start of day two, particularly right-handed pitchers. Why do you think there's so much hesitancy about that demographic? I haven't heard a lot about guys getting injured, right? There's not a lot of health questions at this point that I'm aware of. Is it something about, the fact that they have to have an arm that stays healthy for 5-6 years? What is it about this demographic, and what do you think about in this class?
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. The safety in drafting, and I don't even want to call it safety because we went through a couple of years here where all of the college pitchers were blown out. But there's safety in watching a college pitcher pitch the workload that they've had to and thinking, okay, this guy's going to survive. His arm is going to hold until he makes his debut. That doesn't exist with these high schoolers. A lot of times they're, especially with high school pitching being driven so heavily over the last few years by agents. I don't know if a lot of people know this, but agents are telling guys that are second and third round prospects, you're pitching 2 innings tonight. You're not pitching more than 30 pitches. Agents are driving how much these high school pitchers are throwing. So you don't see these guys, at least some of the elite guys, throw more than 75 or 80 pitches more than once or twice a season. It's pretty rare. So there's a general lack of a track record to seeing these guys hold up over time. But to answer your question, I just think, it takes such a long time for a high school arm to make his debut. And there's so many pitfalls, command, durability, inability to learn a third pitch that, can upend these guys. And I just think there's way more risk in that demographic than there is taking a college catcher, for example, that, okay, he's going to be a fringe average catcher, but he's already proven that he can hit in the SEC. Let's just take him because we know he's going to contribute, rather than, put yourself in the chair of a general manager. Okay, let's take this kid who's not going to debut until September 2027. I might not have a job in September of 2027. So it's stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why I'm like, do you just take a whole bunch of bites at the apple here, take a whole bunch of prep pitchers, and see what happens? Because like you said it earlier, the stars come from that demographic, the Clayton
No
Kershaws of the
doubt.
world. I think, but then I turn around and it's like, why is Marco Raya only pitching 3 innings and
Hmm.
everything? Why Brandon Brea barely threw at all, and then his arm fell off, and it's weird that there's not more aggression, I think, in the organizations to push these guys to get there earlier, especially when there's less levels, right? There's more incentive to be better earlier. And
Yep.
there's only so many bullets before your elbow literally blows up.
Well, I think so. Here's one thing that I would counter with that. While they do dominate at low A and even at high A sometimes, the hitting caliber that they're seeing is not good. I mean, if you go watch a highlight film of the early years of Jackson Jobe or the early years of Andrew Painter or some of these guys that were recently drafted, you'll notice that they're not hitting the quadrant that they're supposed to hit. They're throwing a 90-mile-an-hour slider, and the 19-year-old that they're facing has just never seen it. So he's just not going
Right.
to hit it. So on a highlight film, while it looks like, oh my God, look at that absolutely diabolical slider, just locked him up. Well, he missed his location by 18 inches. And if you do that in the big leagues, you're just going to get pummeled. So that last frontier of commanding 3 pitches for strikes is the tough part. Like, you look back at Jackson Jobe when he was drafted. We're talking about a kid that was throwing 99 miles an hour with a 92-mile-an-hour slider and a parachute 84-mile-an-hour changeup. I don't care where it landed in the strike zone. If you landed it, nobody's hitting that. No, nobody's straight out of a complex league for that matter. So, the command is the last to come. But some of those guys that I just mentioned, talking about risk, Joe blew out, Painter blew out, Barriera
Mm-hmm.
blew out. More and more of these guys, especially listen, all credit to the kid for being healthy. I can't believe Chase Petty's arm isn't in the 4th row somewhere, right? Like he's been throwing 102 since he was 16.
Mm-hmm.
He's an outlier. So yeah, I mean, you would like to see these kids stay healthier a little bit longer because man, like these top draft picks, they keep popping early.
So let me try and pin you down, Joe, on some specific guys, right? Because I mean, really looking through boards, right? So and I realize I'm going to blend guys here a little bit between slightly different tiers, but I think it will illustrate the point of just how many prep arms there are that throw like easy 94. It just feels different to how it was like even 3, 4, or 5 years ago. So like Cash Mayfield, Joey Oki, you already mentioned. If we go down a little bit more, Braylon Dowdy, Tegan Coons, Levi Sterling. There's just guy after guy after guy. Of those prep arms that teams might try to float down to their second pick, let's say a comp pick, because it seems like teams are a little bit more comfortable doing that, or a lot of teams are. Are there guys who are particular favorites of yours? Any guys you're particularly confident about the stuff, or for whom you feel the stuff is particularly outstanding or particularly interesting traits that folks should be paying attention to this spring and in the build up to the draft?
Yeah, man. So when I'm identifying and evaluating high school pitchers, I like to see a trajectory. I don't mind seeing a guy in August, like last August, that was 91 to 93, and then this spring he's touching 95 and maybe he tickled 96. I'm good with that. It's the guys like the Chase Petties. It's the guys, the guys that are touching 99 in high school that I'm like, where do we go from here? Like I don't know where we go from here. So I like to see guys that have steadily gotten better. The body has gotten better.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a sucker for a guy that has a fastball that can miss bats. Like give me a guy that can just beat up on high school competition with one pitch. For that reason, the guy that I really like Braylon Doty. I really do. I have him at, I don't know where he's at on my last update, but behind the curtains, I guess I've got Doty at 25 right now, and I think that's about where he was on the last update. Saw Doty twice last year, and he was 91 to 92 in July. Saw him in late August or early September. All of a sudden, he was 93 to 94, touched 95, 3,000 RPM spinner. And then this spring, he's been up to 97, I think, just spinning the shit out of the ball. I really like Doty. I think he's got a little bit of Lance McCullers in him, and I know McCullers isn't like the golden child of durability, but that I think that's the type of arm that he could become. I'll tell you the other guy that I really like. I've seen him a couple of times now. He's up in my area, so there's a little bit of bias here. But Dax Whitney, people are finally starting to see Dax Whitney surface on boards. Saw this kid last year, he was 90 to 92. Then I think at the end of the year at Pacific Northwest area scout games, he was 93. Now he's touching 95. It's a fastball that absolutely explodes out of the hand. I think a lot of teams are really trying to get him to their second pick in the second round. And with his delivery and his frame and his feel for a slider, his feel for a changeup, and the bat missing fastball, I think he could be one of the best high school pitchers to come out of this class. And it wouldn't surprise me if he went as high as, Comp A. I'll give you one more. It's a guy that I think is kind of blown up on scouting radars ever since Super 60 in March. Chris Lavonis.
Yes.
Like, I don't know what else you can say about Lavonis. Like, up to 97, 3,200 RPM breaking ball. He moves like Matt Brash. Like, it's extremely athletic, like loose, athletic, whippy, explosive, all the adjectives. I don't know if he's going to throw enough strikes to be a stellar starter, but like, you guys have a kid in Minnesota named Griffin Jacks who's built the exact same way. Like, he was a starter. He was whippy and loose and lean, and it never clicked for him over 4 or 5 innings. But look at him now, like one of the best 8th inning weapons in the sport. And I think Chris Lavonis could be that type of a player too.
Yeah, I love that comp. That's a great one.
Jamie actually hates comps. So you making comps.
I love that one. That's a great comp.
It's super fun for me.
Well, I'm not going to comp anybody. I'm not going to comp anybody to like Mariano Rivera, right? But there's something romantic about comping someone to an 8th inning reliever that people will probably forget about 2 years after he retires in Griffin Jacks. Like, solid, really solid, impressive player. If you live in Minnesota, 90% of baseball fans don't know who Griffin Jacks is, but he's really freaking good.
Yeah.
For sure.
So I guess Jamie likes comps like that.
Yeah.
He just tries to write off all other comps. Okay, so last big draft question, and it's not player related at all. The lottery, right? So it changed kind of everything. I mean, the old archaic rules where they alternated the league that picked first, right? And now it's actually kind of become its own event, which the first year the Twins lucked into getting Walker Jenkins, and that was awesome. The Guardians this year, they lucked into the number 1 pick, but the system is kind of harsh on teams like the White Sox this year, which I don't mind because I hate the White Sox. And the A's, I believe, are in the same boat. How do you feel about the lottery? Is the system something that can work, or do you think at some point they're going to have to look at it, probably the next CBA, and say, maybe we got to tinker with this and give other teams a chance? And also, should we be able to trade draft picks at any point in time?
Oh God, don't get me started on that. Yes. I don't know why we're not trading draft picks. You can't give me a foolproof, bulletproof reason why we can't trade draft picks. There are ways to regulate that industry. Make it so if you have a first round pick that you want to trade, go ahead, trade it. But you can't trade your first round pick the next 2 concurrent years. Like, you're not just a trading, marketplace of a team. Like, you're not going to be Oakland just flipping draft picks.
Right, but I don't think the concern is that. The concern is that you're going to have teams like the Dodgers, the Yankees, the Padres that are going to do whatever they have to do to buy and acquire huge amounts of money to then have the right to take the top players in the draft. I love the idea of trading draft picks. I don't love the idea of seeing Paul Skeens wearing pinstripes and stuff like that. So I think, in my opinion, that it's more to protect those small market teams from the big market teams. because you're going to take the money, right, and save the money and get the prospect. But yeah, I think that's a conversation that we could probably spend an hour on.
Definitely. I think, and that's another thing, like you can regulate it to the point where, every owner has to approve it or something, or, there are ways to make sure that teams aren't just trading money, right? You don't want Oakland to trade their first round pick in an effort to save 10 million or $9 million that they wouldn't have to spend in the draft. There are ways to like put that through the commissioner's office and the ownership to make sure that it doesn't happen for the sake of parity. But you're right. I mean, that's a conversation for another time. I think, I tweeted this last week. In a year like this, where the perceived drop off after the top 9 or 10 guys is so dramatic, if you give the ability to a team like Seattle or Toronto or Minnesota or Milwaukee, a team that relies on player development, the chance to move up into the top 10, I think it would add such an exciting dynamic to the event. I mean, adding the lottery added excitement to the draft as it is. I think trading picks would only help that. The second part of your question, the lottery. I love the lottery. I think the lottery does well. Let me say this: I don't think it helps curb tanking. I don't. I mean, owners are going to tank if they're going to tank. It is what it is, right? They don't care if they get the third pick or the fifth pick. They're not making the draft picks. They're paying people. They're paying a scouting director and a general manager to make that pick. Figure it out, type of a thing. So I love the lottery. I do think it is unjustly harsh on a team like the Chicago White Sox, a team that is a collective bargaining tax payer, that they can't pick in the top 6 in back-to-back years. The one thing that I heard from James Fox at Future Sox that I thought was an interesting idea was, okay, penalize us. That's fine. But we should get back the spots that we lost in the lottery the next year. So, for example, this year, the White Sox pick 6th or 5th. I think they picked 5th. Anyways, they should have gotten a number, the number 1, 2, or 3 pick based on odds. Well, because they fell 2 or 3 spots, but they're still in the top 6, shouldn't they get those 2 or 3 spots back the next year when they're not allowed to pick in the top 9? So instead of picking 10th in 2025 by default, you give them back the spots that they lost in the last lottery. So they pick 6th or 7th this year. I think it's an interesting wrinkle that would kind of help kind of regulate teams that are getting the short end of the stick. But I think the only way to fix it is just win.
Yeah.
Right.
Like owners need to try to win.
For sure. And especially tough on a team like the White Sox, it seems like they are far, far away from that, at least at the major league level. And they have some good pieces in their minor league system, but certainly aren't close to competing. Joe, we don't want to hold you up any longer, man, but I do want to make sure that we give you a chance to tell folks where they can find you and give a chance to plug your stuff, because you put out a ton of amazing draft content. There's boards for like 2025, 2026 for the real ones already. Where can people find you on Twitter? Where can people find your written work? Anything that you want to plug, or we can help you plug, we'd love to do it.
Yeah, well, I first just want to say thank you for having me on again, guys. I want to say that I was on this show last year or a couple of years ago. Jeremy, I know I've done a podcast with you or something at some point. Have I not?
I came on one of your things for a mock draft. I think you reached out
You
to
did
Scott.
you did the Prospects Live mock.
I took Connor Prelup for the Twins a little bit early, but
Yeah.
no, but the group, in
Worked
fairness
out.
to the group, they didn't let Brooks Lee fall, and I would have taken Brooks Lee, but instead I was like, you know what, let's just match a team to a player, and Connor Prelup has thrown like an inning and a half since. So
Well,
Yeah.
But you are the prophet. You wanted Brooks Lee, and you ended up with Connor
All right.
Prelip. You end up with both in
Yep.
both worlds.
Yep.
Jamie, to answer your question, so you can find me on Twitter at Joe Doyle MILB. If you're a draftnik, if you really enjoyed the draft conversation, I do 2 episodes of a podcast called Overslot every week. It's a Patreon. We do full team previews. If you're into the draft, you'll enjoy it. And then, you can find all of my boards, all of my work at futurestarseries.com, and it's a good time.
All right. Well, that will do us for today. You can find us on Twitter at DTS_pod1, on YouTube at Destination the Show, and wherever you find your podcast. Joe Doyle, once again, thanks so much for joining us. For Jeremy, I'm Jamie. We will be back with another episode next week. Until then, take it easy.